what's the, what, and you mentioned like the Nephilim and
Yeah, like
I've
the
heard,
command relationship, so to speak, from a
yeah, and
military
I've heard
standpoint.
talk of the Anunnaki
Yeah, different
and the
names
hidden.
that different cultures have for essentially the same beings. The reptilians, I would view them as being the primary abducting, the primary manipulating force. And they're mentioned throughout history in the First Nations lore. For example, the Ojibwe Indians, their creator god Nanabush warred against the lizard people. That's in their traditions, right? That's just one example. Uh, the the reptilians, a number of different ET races are, for all intents and purposes, in a state of cosmic vassalage to the reptilians. The reptilians don't have to do all the abducting themselves. They can get factions of the gray ETs to do it for them. They work in liaise with other ET groups, and quite frankly, and this is going to sound very disturbing, but this is what we've heard coming out of the underground bases for decades now, that not only will, in some of these underground bases, and there's many of them, will one find human deep black military operations, aerospace operations. Some of these facilities, underground and above ground, you will see non-human life forms there working in unison with deep black elements of the military aerospace community,
Well,
including reptilians. Yes.
that's what Bob Wieglin said when I chatted with Bob, wasn't it? Bob said he walked into a meeting. Bob being a former Navy SEAL that was, according to him, recruited to do black ops in the Philippines, on behalf of, was it the Bush family, and well, you can watch my podcast if you want to learn more, Bob Wieglin. But he said he got involved with this Council of 300, or the Table of 300, as I've heard it referred to. I've also heard different numbers, which,
Yeah.
But then he did also say he walked into a meeting and there were 2 7-foot tall reptiles sat there. Right? I'm not laughing at the Bob. I'm just laughing at the just insanity that of the image it conjures up, that there's 2 bloody crocodiles sat in a chair. But it is interesting how different people come up with this. Can I just add something, because it's on my mind and I just want to say it, James, before I forget? But do you ever get that thing where you look at the, let's just call them faces or celebrities in our media, that are in front of you all the time and they're in very prominent places, right? So let's just say it could be a computer guy that's pushing for stuff in the medical industry, right? Computer multi-billionaire, right? It could be the sovereign leader of a, of a nation. It could be some survivor of the Holocaust, who now is a leader of industry and has incredible powers, and let's just say funds lots of organizations around the world that steer human behavior and steer the narrative, right? It could be somebody running for presidency who's the challenger, for, I can't think of the word. It might be, well, I think I've given enough examples. I think we all know the kind of people I'm mentioning. I just think when you look at them and you hear them talk, it's like that scene in Total Recall where I'm probably getting my films mixed up, or my scenes in the film mixed up. But was it where Arnold Schwarzenegger's head gets knocked off, and it's still talking the script, and you realise you've been conned. It's some freaking hybrid technology thing, right, that's going on. I'm not trying to sound wacky. I'm just putting out. Does anybody else notice that some of these people in prominent places really look like they're a bit like lizardy? You know,
there's pronounced anatomical differences with them. Hooded eyelids. Think about this one actor out there whose name has been bandied about as taking certain flights to certain islands, right? He had the gall to play in a movie, a biopic, one of my favorite performers, Bobby Darin. That's a whole other story. But anyway, another thing also, not only did he have marked physical characteristics, and I'm not making a simplistic generalization. I'm not saying that anyone that looks like this is one of them, okay? But eyes sunk deep in the eye sockets, and pronounced cheekbones. Sometimes you'll see extra tendons in the neck and in the arms that really don't belong there. Bizarre musculature. There's one individual, I won't say his name, but he's well known in the UFO field. There used to be a guy named Frequency Fence. I'm guessing it was a guy, but it was a YouTuber called Frequency Fence. And what they would do is they would freeze frame on video when a news presenter, a celebrity, a politician, whatever, what we call shapeshift, morph. And the concept of shapeshifting goes back countless millennia. And what they would do is they would freeze frame, and then they would write in text describing what's happening, pointing out the anatomical changes that are occurring to the person's hands, person's eyes, and these happen very quickly. Sometimes,
yeah, I saw that, James. I also saw the. This is probably a separate thing again, but when there was the I don't want to use the T word, but the let's just call it the attack in Norway, where Breivik went out to the island with his assault rifle and I'm going to say allegedly shot, because I don't believe in talking in definites when nothing you see in the media seems to be true.
Oh yeah, well, here in just to interject for a second, here in Australia, we're supposed to believe that a mentally retarded boy, 67 IQ, Martin Bryant, who if he's still alive is rotting away in a prison, that somehow he wiped out all these people in Port Arthur, Tasmania, with skills that would rival a Delta or SAS shooter. Most of the victims were killed with headshots, and we're supposed to think that this kid can do all this, and that resulted in total gun control in Australia.
James, I keep referring to you as American. Obviously, you've said your ancestry is Philippines, but are you an American living in Australia, or have I just got that wrong?
Yeah, I'm in Australia, yeah.
But are you American by passport or
dual now?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just referred to you as American, and it might just be that you're an Australian who doesn't have an Australian accent. Sorry. Yeah. So the Andres Breivik thing is when he's in court and he's giving his statement and he's doing his, his, I don't know if you call that a right-wing salute or whatever, right? Bits of his face start like digitalizing out, like something from a that Total Recall film. His face starts doing funny stuff, and I don't know if that's just some like clip somebody's taken on some bad, some equipment that's not getting a signal, or whether it was just a a glitch in the recording or something, but it does make you question whether that guy was completely digital. You know, he didn't exist, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm not trying to sound like, you know, I'm not trying to sound out there, but we got to remember, folks, there was a time in life where people believed Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president, you know.
Still believe, a lot of people still believe that.
Well, yeah, well, there we go. The same thing with, again, let's just call it the events in New York 20 years ago. You know, there were people that believed that narrative, and off the back of it, we had a lot of conflict, right? We now know from the abundance of evidence available by these very dedicated researchers that is what we were told is completely fictitious, right? So to that end, it's like we're allowed to have these conversations, James, aren't we? You know, we're allowed to discuss.
Yes, because
narrative.
It goes back to what you talked about, just to inject for a second, because I would argue that it's not normal for a planet to have this much conflict, chaos, confusion, strife, misery. This alien technology exists. So on any normal planet, there goes famine, there goes maladies and illnesses of various sorts. There goes the reliance on fuel and oil and whatnot, and polluting the environment in the process. But of course, that's hoarded. Ben Rich, the aforementioned Ben Rich, said it would take an act of God to pry it out of these corporations, because once the military finishes their initial evaluation of these craft, often as not, unless the military can hang on to it, these craft wind up with the aerospace corporations and wind up in these SAPs, special access programs, that go into a black hole. So the technology exists to make this planet a much better place than it is, but instead we get war, chaos, and all this other stuff.
Yeah, we could live in peace on Earth. We certainly, it's not just about the war and all this sort of stuff, James, although obviously it's a big thing. It's the fact that when, and let's just use the biblical example or the example of Jesus, when he talked about living in paradise on earth or heaven on earth, he's talking about it's in your head. It's the decisions you make in your head. It's how you adapt your thinking from mainstream, basically what you're indoctrinated in from a child, which is basically a form of no different to slavery. Jesus was saying, no, don't think like that. Don't hate on your neighbor. Don't blah, 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 blah. And if you free up your thinking, you can live on this heaven on earth, right? So it's not just about the fact that we've brought the planet to the edge of, not the planet's going to keep going long after we've gone, but we've brought humanity to this state where we live in pollution. We've got this weird stuff going on in the skies. People hate each other. People just spend most of their day on a piece of technology hating upon each other or putting across their opinions. And, maybe I'm, hold my hand up, guilty of that. I'm just trying to be constructive. But it's not just that we've created this mess on Earth. It's the fact that these sociopaths or whatever they are, reptilians, whether they're just the global mafia that I referred to earlier, they're stealing this from you. They're hiding it from you.
Even the teachings from the universities, from the school systems, all the way from grade 1 all the way up, and as well as the entertainment industry, it just teaches fragmentation, strife, acrimony, atomization. There's nothing unifying or wholesome about the messages that we're bombarded with. The normalization of things that any normal, sane person would find abhorrent and repellent are being pushed in our face, and we're being offensive if we complain about it or even notice it, right? Because that's what they've done. They've taken, with victim identity politics, they'll find 0.001% of the population that feels themselves being persecuted or being victimized in some way. And then the rest of society has to toe the line and not do anything to offend that tiny percentage, real or imagined, that are feeling persecuted. But the end result, the bottom line, is more oppression, more authoritarianism, more totalitarianism, less freedom of speech, right? And I would argue that this whole business of social distancing, we're not allowed to touch each other, we have to wear a mask, all that is dehumanizing and it's inhuman. And I would argue that that's, to me, another reason why. And there's so much occultic symbology behind a lot of this, the kneeling down, the mask on the face. And it's like Babylon, mystery Babylon in our face constantly, and we're just supposed to roll over and accept it. But I think that there's a spirit within humanity. I think that there's elements within humanity that are not going to put up with this, that it's our destiny to regain our sovereignty, our spiritual freedom, and go back to the stars whence we came. Because for us normal people, we suffer from planetary confinement. Whereas these elites, I'm not talking about Elon Musk, I'm talking about those deep black projects like Ben Rich was involved in. They get to go off world. They have access to stupendous technology. There's nothing woo-woo about it. It's just a better understanding of physics and having the hardware and the resources to do these things. Whereas us, we're taught the bogus science, we're taught the bogus non-existent history. Everything we're told by the media and by the schools is either nonsense or designed to whip up this emotional reaction within us when we're confronted with things that we're not supposed to agree with. So I would argue that all of this is inhuman. It's not meant to make us a unified whole. It's meant to divide us and conquer us.
Yeah, order out of chaos.
And to complete that thought too, real quickly, Chris, there are certain psychics, and for people scoff at the notion of psychics, always remember there was once a very well-known, publicized Pentagon Defense Intelligence Agency remote viewing program. It started off with, naval intelligence was involved, and Stanford Research Institute was involved. Anyway, the point of relevance is there are psychics, and there are psychics that work for the military. Now, on the other hand, there's your average psychic person on the street. They have the second sight. So when a regular, normal person looks at, say, a particular politician, all they see is a politician. But the psychic person, when they look at the same politician, they see an entity overshadowing the face of the politician, in our example. Could be a reptilian entity, could be a gray entity. It's different entities. It's all a sympathetic resonance. Whatever the genetic profile of that individual is, whatever weird things they've been getting into, self-abuse, drug abuse, whatever, alcoholic abuse, pornography, whatever the case may be, certain entities will glom onto that individual. And a psychic, a certain kind of psychic, can see that that person is a host for an entity. And then once again, the First Nation lore, the traditions, to them, this was common knowledge. It's only in the West, when we've been so dumbed down that we just have a knee-jerk response, oh, that's nonsense, that could never happen. When for countless millennia, that was common knowledge to everybody, basically.
My gosh, yes. So let's talk then, James, about this thing that I've come across. And it's that a couple of people have written to me. And whereas I think when I was in psychosis from overuse of crystal meth, I just describe it as you have a balance in your body, as I'm saying with the diet, right? You have a chemical balance, of course you do, but I mean, everything does, I guess, right? And of course, when you're putting in a toxic chemical that's made in a factory in Asia, into your body consistently for months and months on end every single day, which is what I did, not only are you obviously toxifying your body, but I would just say that these sensitive firings in your brain of neurons and all this stuff I'm not even clever enough to pretend I understand, I just say it gets overloaded. Instead of your brain firing like this, it starts to go, and you conjure up these this alternative reality. And I can talk about it if people want examples. People might find it quite fascinating. I can tell you what I experienced, but the messages I've received is, no, Chris, your brain wasn't overloaded with this. It's that when you do this thing, i.e. take drugs, oh God, this really, I don't even know if I'm clever enough to put it into words, but it's like these demons enter you and take control of your thoughts, right? I'm going to say at this moment in time, I'm going to go with what I said. It's just an overload of chemicals in your brain, and your brain starts going haywire because it's a very sensitive organism. You know, it's like your car. You put a balance of oil, water, and petrol in it. If you start skewing with that balance, you're going to put orange juice in your petrol. Your car might be all right for a while, or you're going to put nitrous oxide on it, and it's going to race for 3 weeks, and then suddenly it's going to start breaking down. I just think it's that simple. But the notion that I've been made aware of is that I don't really understand it. I don't know if they're trying to say it's the devil's jumped in there and he's giving you these thoughts. I think it's actually more, they say jinn being like an evil spirit, gets inside you and controls you. And what are your thoughts on that, James? Or maybe you can even explain what I'm trying to say even better.
In just about every, once again, First Nation tradition, there is an understanding that drugs, hallucinogens, plant medicine, if you will, that there's not only a ceremonial aspect to it and a higher consciousness aspect to it, but in some traditions, the purpose of particular drug-taking ceremonies, for lack of a better term, plant medicine ceremonies, is to commune with or get in contact with the spirit world. Ayahuasca is a classic example of this, where people take it and then they see things they ordinarily wouldn't see because certain parts of the brain are activated, and it allows them to have this, lack of a better term, second sight. Our pineal glands are calcified because of all the fluoride in the water and processed foods and whatnot. So what happens is, in some traditions, they intentionally partake of certain psychoactive plant medicine, specifically to get in contact with spirit guides, let's say. Now, remember what Tesla said: with resonance, everything is possible. All matter is energy that vibrates or resonates at a particular frequency. And what seems to be solid matter around us, like this table in front of me, this desk, is not really solid at a subatomic quantum level. There's a lot of space between the molecules and the atoms. When people say, and this has been reported many times, not only can aliens pass through solid objects, because really just a question of having the technology and the know-how to alter the density of a solid object, at least momentarily. We talked about portals before, at least momentarily, to allow a being to go through, right?
Oh,
Enter
I
into
was
our
going to
reality.
say that Bob Wiegand said he saw guys just walk through walls.
Well, the
So,
military has been doing that for a long time because they're accessible, deep black elements of the military, because of their access and ability to utilize, for lack of a better term, alien technology. But then again, a shaman, a yogi, uh, an Aboriginal elder can do the same things. They don't need woo-woo technology to do it. They just know how to alter their density, their frequency, intentions, what have you. I encourage your readers, your viewers, to get books like, about Black Elk, the Lakota Sioux Elder. Wonderful book, The Secrets of the Mysteries of the Lakota Elder. I forget the subtitle. Another book is Rolling Thunder, about the late intertribal medicine man, Rolling Thunder. He was capable of all kinds of superhuman feats, but really it's know-how. But anyway, getting back to the the idea of plant medicine, right? When one ingests such plant medicine, and nowadays with pharmacopoeia, sorcery is the real meaning of pharmacopoeia, pharmacy. Certain types of pharmaceuticals can actually open people up, right? Because our frequency, our dimension, pulses or beats at a certain rhythm, a certain resonance. There are other realities around us that are just out of phase of our own, that beat or pulse at a slightly offset resonance. So if one either is born or develops the second sight that I spoke of earlier, or partakes in certain psychoactive ingredients, they can see, they have the second sight to be able to see into, for lack of a better term, other dimensions. And they will see that, well, they're not alone, that they'll see that there's entities and spirits and beings around them, right? So what happens with certain chemical drugs like crystal methadone in our example, and you don't have to take this on board. I understand that your experience is uniquely your own, and in no way would I disrespect you, Chris, and say this is what's going on. This is, what my research tells me. I'm only coming from a perspective of what I've learned from people that are particularly in the alien abduction field, like my late great mentor, Barbara Bartley, who was assassinated, for lack of a better term, along with her husband. And also from Jerry Marzinski, who spent 30 years in the psychiatric field, first in the largest uh, asylum in the world at one time in Georgia, and then for years after that in the correctional prison facilities in Arizona. And he spent a lot of time with chronic long-term meth users. What happens is, and again, I just ask your readers just to momentarily be open-minded, your listeners and viewers. Tesla said everything with resonance, everything is possible. So when an individual, in our example, begins partaking in crystal methadone or its derivatives, what happens is they develop a sympathetic resonance with these discarnate beings. I mean, they're not visible in the normal visual spectrum for average everyday folk, but they're there nonetheless. And these beings are parasitic in nature. And so what happens is someone starts taking this drug, they get into this sympathetic resonance with these beings. It allows them to plug into holes in the auric field, the energy body of the individual first, and then into their physical body, right? Think of it in computer terms. We all have a firewall, right? And when someone, whether it's through alcohol, and the root word of alcohol is from the Arabic spirits, right? When chronic abuse of whatever substance, it'll lower our firewalls enough to let some of these entities malignly influence us. And the really insidious aspect of it is these entities speak to us in what we perceive to be our own thought voice, if you will. So the thought voice could be compelling them to go out and do something they normally wouldn't do, watch pornography, uh, stalk somebody, whatever the case may be, because these entities get a feed. Okay, Robert Monroe was the psychic. He was a world-class astral traveler. In fact, he wrote literally the Bibles, if you will, of astral travel, journeys out of the body, far journeys, and he wrote another book. He set up the Monroe Institute in Virginia, and actually the aforementioned Defense Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon paid multi-million-dollar contracts to Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute to train operatives from the DIA and the intelligence community to remote view, to astral travel, et cetera, et cetera. In our field, I've referred to military personnel who can astral travel as astral operators. That's what I call them, right? And Robert Monroe, it's well documented, had million-dollar contracts from the Pentagon and DIA to train people to astral travel and remote view, right? So keep that point in mind, that when we leave our bodies, we're not alone out there. There are other entities around. And these entities are parasitic in nature. And there was a term that Robert Monroe coined called loosh, Loosh. And what loosh refers to is our life essence, our life force. And these discarnate, in our dimension, parasitical entities, they feed off that loosh. And the thing about it is, it serves no useful purpose for these parasitical lower dimensional entities to keep us in a state of balance and harmony and serenity and upliftedness, if that's a word. No, they can't get a feed off that. But if they can malignly influence us through our thoughts to indulge in self-destructive, self-abusive behaviors, that we're being affected personally, but we're affecting those around us. And then through hook and crook, we're promoted into a senior position in a corporation somewhere where we can tyrannize all of our underlings, and then just a loosh fest just spreads out. See, that's how it works in our dimension. See, there's a feeding frenzy at work with these interdimensional beings, which are just out of phase of our own. Now, in some cases, like those that have the genetic predisposition, like I talked about through hybridization or whatnot, it makes it easier for these entities to take them up as hosts. And a lot of times, like in the Luciferian cults, for example, these adepts, these magus, these warlocks, they know they're hosting one or more entities. And they know that the downloads and the insights they're getting is not their own, it's coming from some nether dimension, right? So, when people say, oh, well, that's silly, that's nonsense, yeah, tell it to the warlocks, tell it to the adepts, like Aleister Crowley and people like him, because that's what they did. But, the polar opposite of that, and, there's always a bad apple in every tradition. There's bad apples amongst Native American elders, there's bad apples amongst Aboriginal medicine men and medicine women, right? But generally, we can say that a lot of the elders that are able to commune and interact with the spirit world and do manifest some degree of metaphysical capability, let's say, most of them utilize their abilities for good, like the aforementioned Rolling Thunder, the aforementioned Black Elk, but there's others that don't, right? And in my field, right, there's all kinds of people out there that masquerade as a new age la-di-da guru, but they're really a warlock or really an adept that is into some dark shite. Pardon my Anunnaki, okay? So the point of relevance, Chris, is just as in certain ceremonial traditions, and one of my friends, the late George Andrews, he wrote a book called Drugs and Magic. And it's a thick book, and it's an anthology. Every chapter is a different tradition, a different culture, and their types of ceremonies where they utilize drugs specifically to commune with and get in contact with spirits. So the point of relevance is, if it can be done in a ceremonial, indeed in some cases a therapeutic aspect, because of this duality, polarity kind of world we live in, I can see how if there are meth labs out there and the meth makers themselves are these corrupted, entity-infested, soulless individuals, I could see them making these concoctions with the express purpose of enabling, making it so people can get taken up as hosts eventually. And also with the pharmaceuticals, I've had personal friends who told me that after they'd taken certain pharmaceuticals that they were prescribed, they were suddenly able to see into the spirit realm and see entities. And just one quick last point, and I'd like your take on this. A lot of people saw the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Now, it's been well known within LSD tripping circles that for some people, when they take LSD, sometimes they can see these reptilian entities overshadowing people, like I'd mentioned, because what's happened is the LSD got into parts of their brain which allowed them to develop or kind of like revive the dormant pineal gland, which allowed them to have second sight and notice, oh, that person, he's got a reptilian entity overshadowing him. Now, there's a scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and this was long before the David Icke books came out. David Icke actually got some of his information from me. People call me an Icke-tard now, like I copied him, when it was actually the other way around. He reached out to me, right? And my mentor, Barbara Bartley. Anyway, in that scene, Hunter S. Thompson, who's been implicated, he's dead now, we can say this. There was a MK Ultra survivor, Paul Bonacci, who was taken to Bohemian Grove, where he stated, for the record, that Hunter S. Thompson was involved in child trafficking and making snuff films, right, for the elite at the Bohemian Grove. So this movie comes out, and they have that weird scene that a lot of people couldn't make sense of, where Hunter S. Thompson is tripping out on LSD. He walks into a hotel casino in Las Vegas, into the restaurant, and then suddenly people start having an orgy. The next thing you know, he looks back, and now not only are they having an orgy, they're having a blood orgy. But guess what? The humans that were having the orgy earlier, now they've morphed into reptilians having a blood orgy. Okay? And people go, WTF, what's all that about? Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Because all this stuff can only be understood, in my view, if we just separate the human out of the equation for a second, and then look at the predatory behavior of these reptilians and the reptilian hybrid plantation managers they work through here on the surface. No frontal lobe, no impulse control, they're an entirely different species. They may look like us, they may morph once in a while. A psychic can see that, oh, that guy's a host for a reptilian entity. But you know what? It's like, these are the characters that run the institutions. They run the fraternal orders. They run the intelligence agency, and they all work in cahoots. So it's like the Chinese have their reptilian mob, the Anglo have theirs, right? And that's another thing, and I want your thoughts on this. The worst thing America could do right now is get pulled into a massive sucker play over the Straits of Taiwan, over the freedom of navigation, going to war with China, going to war with Iran. That's the last thing this planet needs right now. And it seems to me that the controllers are pushing things in that direction. Well, everything is diverted with all this COVID stuff and this communist insurrection. The possibility exists that the U.S. and its allies could be suckered into another war that's even bigger than all the wars we've had up till now. So, I'll pause for a moment, Chris.
So there's certain things I think we need to accept are just not good. The diet that I talk about, the toxic diet that we eat, that stops us from achieving heaven on earth, spirituality, openness, and good thinking and good relationships with our families and our fellow human beings. All this stuff is stuff we can, address at a sort of grassroots level before we even have to start considering whether there's people from other planets. But on the other hand, maybe unless we address this issue, this stuff is never going to fall into place, because at the minute we are being so, there's an expression for it, isn't it? We're being sold a sucker or whatever it is, you know, we are being taken as a bunch of suckers. And sadly we are, you know, we're just so ridiculously uneducated and gullible now, and uninitiated into the way that these sociopaths, whoever they are, right, the global mafia, we just completely, it's like we're getting worse at understanding it instead of better. But I don't know, you know, I don't know how it all ties in. When you look at the JFK thing, you can clearly see the same people involved in JFK's demise were the same groups belonging to the same societies and political persuasions, and corporate interests that wanted to maintain the Vietnam War. You know, there's a direct, you can see these kind of, you know, these rich old, let's just call it American families, that really, if you knew how these families made their money, which was on opium, you know, importing drugs, funding both sides in wars, you know, some of these families use slave labor from the camps in Germany or that were in Europe, Poland and whatever during the Second World War. These American families use that labor to make themselves rich. And then in recent times, so in the last 10 years, the exact same family goes to these places like Auschwitz, for example, do a press conference and tell the world how this must never happen again, not divulging that their family got rich off that camp, right? So this is, there's some clear...
Well, there's absolute proof that Standard Oil, the Rockefeller Standard Oil, had prevailed upon the State Department, and who then prevailed upon the War Department to stop bombing certain sites in Germany where Standard Oil had interlocking directorships with E.G. Farben, for example. E.G. Farben, but in German you would pronounce it E.G. Farben. But yeah, also the trade of the oil, right? Where there was an understanding, a wink and a nod understanding that Standard Oil oil tankers could go to neutral places like Portugal and whatnot, and not have to worry about being torpedoed by either the Americans or the Germans, right? So, you know, there was this understanding to not bomb certain Standard Oil facilities when the rest of Germany was being hammered day and night, RAF Bomber Command by night, the U.S. Army Air Forces by day. But they make an exception for the Rockefellers, don't they? You see, that's how it works. And people will never have a difficult time grasping the money powers behind it. Now, I must say that one thing I like about Chris Ryan's novels is he gets gritty. He gets down and talks about some really dark stuff, right? But it's all novelized, so it's, I guess, more palatable, right? Because he'll talk about child trafficking rings used by MI6 to blackmail politicians and blackmail people. Well, we know that's going on, but he writes about it in some of his novels. He talks about, you know, drug trafficking and, you know, all the psychos that wind up in the forces and, you know, what has to be done to them and stuff. So one thing I like about his novels. Another thing about Chris Ryan, too, in his novels, he talks about the lizard brain, right? He talks about getting into the lizard brain in order, you know, I guess to do certain things. Now, in the American military, what they do in some of these boot camps, and even into the time when they're in the forces already, they make them scream at the top of their, you know, lungs just to get into that berserker kind of mode, right? And, you know, in the paras, we have the windmilling where they're just beating the crap out of each other. And there's all these kind of hazing things that go on, which, I mean, I've never been in the military in this life, but I can say that I don't really see the utility in that unless the purpose is to lodge them into that R complex reptilian brain, the lizard brain that Ryan talks about. Also, there's another book, if your readers can find it. Carl Sagan was a noted UFO debunker, but he knew a lot that was really going on. He was an astrophysicist.
James, I think I feel I need to point this out just on the grounds of making people aware. And this is not directed at Chris Ryan. I've only actually, we're talking about the SAS guy, right?
Yeah, yeah. And his novels, which I read once in a while.
I read The One That Got Away, which is his story of how he walked out of Iraq after his Bravo 20 patrol was compromised, right? And I mean this in no disrespect to any of my military buddies, but I'm yet to meet one that writes their own books.
Oh, really? They have ghostwriters?
Yeah.
A lot of them do.
And the reason I highlight that is because I think the book industry is very controlled as well. When you see
yes.
the
yes. The enemies are always the Iranians, the Syrians, the Chinese, you know, because I read novels by Americans too, and it's always the same.
There's that, but there's also, I'll give you a couple of examples, and this is just for people to mull over. Does it mean I definitely think these people are guilty of this, that, and the other? They might not even, a lot of the people we talk about might not even know what's going on. It's just their personas, their public images used. For example, J.K. Rowling, right? I don't know her personally. I wish her no anything. I'm sure she's a wonderful person. I don't really know much about her, to be honest. But what I do know is that she wrote books about witchcraft. And they were aimed at essentially children or young people. And that suddenly she went from being an obscure writer to being the... Now, I'm just putting that out there. I know people are going to write and go, yeah, but they're great books, Chris. I'm not saying they're not great books. I'm not saying they're not a phenomenally brilliant read that I might like to read myself. I'm just highlighting that this dark agenda is always thrust in our faces, isn't it? From the entertainment media.
Yeah.
By the time a child is 18, you know, an adult, they've seen something ridiculous like 500,000 murders. It might even be more than that, right? So that's just one point I'd like to make there. The other thing, Stephen King, right? I was, he wrote a book called On Writing. I listened to the audiobook version constantly when I was writing my first book, I believe. Was it my first? Yeah, I think it was my first book. I loved it. I loved listening to his story, right? How he got into writing, how he was in a band when he was younger and all this kind of, and I loved it, right? I never twigged until knowing what I know now, that there's one part of that book, he's talking about how describing something can mean one thing to one person, one thing to another. I'm paraphrasing here. It's been years since but what I do remember, he said, picture a cage. He said, in that cage is a rabbit. He said, now some people will immediately picture a white rabbit. Other people might, you know, there's a number on the rabbit. And I'm just saying that his first book, Carrie, right, which is essentially, and again, I've seen a film. I'm not sure if I read the book or not. I don't think I have, but it's not a very pleasant story, is it? It's kind of a girl who's possessed or can channel the devil or whatever. He went from like being a full-time school teacher who had to work his ass off. He wrote his books in his laundry room, right, on a little tiny desk on a little computer. He had no luck. He kept sending his scripts off. No luck. They always come back. Sorry, try again next time. Try again. All this. Wrote Carrie. Bang. $300,000 advance. Right?
We see it in Hollywood with these obscure people like Kevin Spacey and Tom Hanks, who I never thought were good actors anyway. Suddenly they just superstardom.
Oh God! Let's not go there for this podcast, mate. But I'll tell you what. I'm not talking about any individuals in particular. But I'm always like innocent until proven guilty. Just because I'd want the same courtesy extended to me. But bloody hell, you don't start looking at them in a different light, don't you? And I'm going to say this again. They just take on this look to me, and I can't put it into words.
Like they're all related, like they all look like they're from the same clutch of eggs or something.
They just take on this look, and I can't explain it. They just take on this look that to me makes me think, my God, I don't think I ever knew you at all, or who you were as a person or an actor. I loved you on the screen. I thought you were this great person, woman or man, and now I'm starting to view you in this alien
context.
Like, yeah, form. It's just bizarre.
It is.
Almost like they all belong to some club that we're not, and we're never going to be members of. We might be affiliate or something. But, God, what a strange planet we live on.
It is. You know what I'd like to, mention, before we round it up, this segment, because I'd love to come back on your show and love to have you back on mine. And, I came from a military family. I don't know what other people's beliefs are, but just like General Patton, I'm a firm believer in reincarnation, and I know for a fact, at least from my own personal basis, that I've had a number of lives as a warrior. And so in this life, my warriorism, if you want to call it that, just expressed itself in a different form. You know what I mean? Being a podcaster, being a researcher, and sitting down with people and debriefing them and helping them get over some of these experiences. That's my form of combat these days.
Well, my gosh, James, you reiterate what I'm always saying. People say, Chris, should I join the Marines? And my thing is, how can I say no when it's like one of the best things I ever did as a broken young man that was told he was worthless at everything, and I went, no, I'm not. I'm going to join the toughest military force in the world. This is based. Sorry, it all goes all schoolboy bloody bickering now. But the Marines the British Marines is the longest basic training of any infantry force in the world. That is a fact. Unless someone's going to tell me now that something that, not talking about special forces, Spetsnaz or SAS. I'm talking about like as a ground force, right? As a ground floor training, right?
Yeah, and you guys had in the NATO scheme of things, you had to operate and perchance fight in northern Norway in the winter. That's a whole different ballgame. The Arctic warfare training that you described and what the mountain leaders go through, that's a different universe for me. You know what I mean?
In order to get our green beret, the culmination of our 32 weeks training is a series of 4 commando tests, right? They're just the physical. This isn't just all the theoretical stuff you have to learn and the skills like your field craft and your cliff assaults, and you're leaving a landing craft to assault a beach and forming a beachhead and patrolling and abseiling and night navigation and you know, all learning all the weaponry in you know, all the small arms weaponry in the British forces. You've got to do all of that as well as these 4 commando tests, and they are extreme endurance. And to do 4 of them when you're at your weakest, you're most tired, you're most broken down at the end of this training, where you think the training would build you up to be big and strong, and it doesn't. It actually makes you, it drains you, it physically drains you. Then and this is why these tests are so important. You've got to have the mental fortitude to force yourself not to give up. Very, very hard, you know. So anyway, I proved to all those people that told me, and if you're listening, you don't prove anything to anyone except yourself, ever. That's that ego thing, right? But I was young, I was ego driven. I thought, I'll show my family, I'll show them I can do this, right? So I did. It was a very proud moment to get presented your green beret. It's an amazing experience to go into any kind of combat. As I said, mine was Northern Ireland. Very weird to be a teenager. You've got what is essentially a machine gun. You're walking down the main street in a British city, right? That was a, you know, bizarre experience. Some people are going to say, no, it's an Irish city, Chris. And do you know what? I'm not involved. I've got no dog in that fight. I'm for peace, anti-war, right? Whatever. So here's the thing. So I'm proud of, you know, it was a big thing in my life, James, right? And I get young people now say, Chris, should I join? And I'm also, I do a lot of work for veteran suicide. You know, I talk to veterans who are struggling. I every year I do an extreme endurance challenge. So I ran the length for the United Kingdom, unsupported, just camping at the side of the road, 1,999 miles. Pretty much I ran it non-stop, bar sleeping in my tent, right? Last year I did 4 Ironman triathlons at the same time combined. So that was a 9-mile swim, 450-mile cycle, and then a 108-mile run. 108 miles non-stop running. So I think that gives me a little bit of a right to be able to talk about Veterans Affairs, because I'll put my money where my mouth is, right, when it comes to supporting our veterans community. And I see the damage that has been done. We are in a suicide epidemic at the minute, and I know over there in I don't know what it's like in Australia, James, but in the States it's the same, right? It's not a nice business. There's terrible videos come out about the behavior of the Australian SAS in Afghanistan. It's really shocked a lot of people to see the animalisticness of, you know, the animalism, or whatever the word is, of war, right? We've got a lot of broken men and women now in this country that have gone off believing they were doing the honorable thing, protecting our citizens, only to have to look at themselves in the mirror and think, what was it actually all about? And on top of that, they've been asked to do horrible things while they've been in those countries, right? It's a serious business, folks. You know, it's not a bloody computer game where there's good guys and there's bad guys. It's just never that simple. So off the back of that, I'm anti-war, but I am pro-warriors, James. Whether that's a digital warrior, whether that's someone that's actually prepared go and whatever it might be. If children are being, you know, having done to them what is it being alleged, count me in and count all my buddies. They'll all go. They will all go and help, right? As long as they obviously get the message gets through to them in the first place in a way they can understand. I'm making no comment on that actual situation. I don't really. My jury's kind of out on it because I'm always like, well, where's the proof? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and I kind of think it does, but it's hard to take action when you don't. When it's all everything is kind of like it seems to be hearsay. But we all kind of also know that it is probably going on. And if it's for children, we got to err on the side of caution and go, well, let's go with it's probably going on, because if we're wrong, well, you know, we've done the right thing, right? So, yeah, I'm just trying to point out it's just a big, massive contradiction that I'm anti-war, but I'm sort of pro-warriors, and there's never been a greater time that we need them. But following our conversation, James, I don't know where they start looking. Where's the fight? How would you, like, if it's the way that we're saying, James, where do these individuals meet? You know, how deep? We've seen the people that we've discussed. We haven't really like disclosed any names or anything, but we've given you the kind of ideas of the people that whether it's a reptilian or whether it's just that they're not very well adjusted people. But does it go like much higher than them? Do they or I mean, you're saying their controllers are extraterrestrial. I'm not, like I say, I'm not going to dispute it, but what if they're not extraterrestrial? What if it's of this earth? How?
It varies. There are reptilians and other beings that are subterrestrial. They're subterranean and have been there all along, clear back to the days of the dinosaurs. There are interdimensional beings, but it's not mutually exclusive. Some of these subterranean beings and some of these extraterrestrial beings that come here in literal craft or in portals, stargates, they have an interdimensional capability too. So some of them do. So it's a mixed bag. It's not mutually exclusive, one or the other, right? Really, it comes down to know-how and technology. In some of these other star systems, there are naturally occurring elements that simply cannot be found in our solar system, because our solar system, in the modern astrophysics sense, is a single star system, whereas most star systems are binary or multiple star systems. So there's more material. The processes that created those star systems are different than what happened here. So there would tend to be different elements and different resources to be found in some of these other worlds. So, you know, it's like different physics involved, actually, too. And the point I want to make about the military aspect is, like you just talked about, you know, all the different skills you have to learn. I would say that we talked earlier about the mental rigidity of certain military people, especially the higher ranks. They just seem to have their blinders on. Well, for those that are still have some degree of independent thought, I just ask you to make the mental adjustment, because, you know, all these wars are contrived. These wars don't benefit humanity, but utilize and embrace your skills that you learned, you know, your physical and mental toughness and your endurance and your know-how and your skills, because those are things that will hold you and your family in good stead in the future, because we're going to be coming into some really rocky times. And, you know, now more than ever, your skills, you know, will have some usefulness, you know, because of the dumbing down process. A lot of these millennials, they can't even change a tire. They can't even tie a fishing lure. They lack life skills. I'm not being critical or making fun of them, Chris. It's just
No, we've been you know, all our hard edges, which can, you know, can really help us out, have all been smoothed off. It's I notice it in the language. I notice in the way people speak now.
Yes, it's really been dumbed down.
They're afraid to use not power words, but words which accurately describe what you're trying to say. They choose other words now because they think that's going to upset. And it's just become, as Clint Eastwood would say, a clusterfuck, you know?
It has been. So I probably got to call it a night because my voice is going. I got a problem with asthma sometimes. That's why I got this inhaler. But it's been a blast talking to you. And
let's put this chat up on your channel and mine. I'm sure. I hope people get as much out of it as I had. I've just found it fascinating. And maybe we can, if folks, you want to put your questions below, for both James and myself, and anything you feel really, and we could perhaps do a live chat, James, and
yeah.
We'll pick a time that's good for us both, and we'll do a live chat, and we'll let people in the live chat ask us questions as well. And as I said, I think this is going to be the first of many chats, because it's helping me to access like a new level of information that I'm just getting drip fed it by lots of different places at the minute. And if it wasn't for the fact I get so many different people who are not even connected in any way telling me the same things, that I find it interesting just to, I'd rather talk about this kind of stuff than watch a soap opera on telly and have my brain scooped out and eaten by the elite.
That's right. One last point I'd like to make before I sign off is what's happening here in our solar system is an extension of cosmic wars that have gone on for millions of years. If you look at the iconography of NASA, for example, and also a lot of these occultic traditions around the world, there's this obsession with certain star systems, Orion, with the Sirius system, so on and so forth, that in the folkloric tradition of the Lakota, for example, they say that, these beings from the Sirius system came and taught them things. And in Australia, the Aborigines, every Aboriginal tribe in Australia say that these beings from the Pleiades came in and helped them out, right? So it's embedded in the lore of the First Nations of the world, and it's in the Celtic lore, it's in the English lore, if one digs deeply into it, that these beings have come from elsewhere to, at turns, either help us or malignly influence us. And the solar system is a battleground. I mean, the asteroid belt, one can argue, used to be a planet that was blown up. You want to talk about wars, right? And these cosmic wars have been described in the ancient Babylonian text, the Enuma Elish, in some of the ancient Sumerian chronicles, etc., etc. There's always these stories of wars of the heavens and gods and men and fallen angels. So all that is playing out again, folks. Is just I want to leave it at this point. So thank you so much for having me come on, Chris. It's been an honor, and thank you so much for all the work that you've done.
Well, yeah, as we said at the beginning, though, it is a joint podcast, so that's why we've both been trying to, chip in our wisdom, yeah. So thank you to you, James, and to all of your subscribers and mine. Much love to you all, as always, and let's go forwards together, isn't it?
Let's make a better world. And to all your viewers and my viewers, have a very pleasant time wherever you may be.
Brilliant.